Good evening, listeners. This is Evelyn Brooks, and you're tuned in to Echoes of 1970. Tonight, I want to tell you about Dorothy Brennan, a lighthouse keeper's daughter who made a choice that would haunt an entire coastline for decades. No one knew why she went back that night, but deep down, they knew something was ending. Dorothy wasn't supposed to be at Crescent Point Lighthouse on November 14, 1973. She had left 3 years earlier, after her father's funeral, swearing never to return to that isolated tower where waves crashed against black rocks and fog swallowed the world whole. She had moved to Portland, found work at a bookstore, built a new life among people who didn't know what it meant to grow up in total solitude. But on that cold November evening, she drove her old Chevrolet back down the coastal highway, her hands gripping the steering wheel so tight her knuckles turned white. The lighthouse had been automated by then. No keeper was needed anymore. The light turned on by itself every evening, a mechanical rhythm replacing her father's careful hands. Dorothy had received a letter that morning, handwritten on yellowed paper with no return address. Inside were just 4 words. He never left, Dorothy. She told her roommate she'd be back by midnight. She told her boss at the bookstore she had a family emergency. But Dorothy told no one the truth about what was pulling her back to Crescent Point, because she herself didn't fully understand it. The letter sat in her coat pocket as she drove, and every few miles she'd touch it through the fabric, making sure it was still real. The fog rolled in thick that evening, the kind that made headlights useless. Dorothy knew these roads by heart, though. She had walked them as a child, carrying her father's dinner in a metal tin, counting her steps in the darkness. 2,300 steps from the keeper's cottage to the lighthouse door. She had counted them so many times she could still feel the number in her bones. When she arrived, the cottage looked smaller than she remembered. Paint peeled from the wooden walls. The garden her mother had tended before the cancer took her was now just weeds and wild grass. Dorothy sat in her car for a long moment, engine running, watching the lighthouse beam sweep across the sky, one rotation every 15 seconds. She had fallen asleep to that rhythm for 18 years of her life, but the most shocking part was yet to come. Dorothy stepped out of the car and immediately smelled it, salt and decay, and something else, something wrong. The front door of the cottage hung open, creaking on rusted hinges. She hadn't expected that. The Coast Guard was supposed to maintain the property, even if no one lived there anymore. She pulled a flashlight from her glove compartment and approached slowly. Inside, everything was exactly as she had left it 3 years ago. Her father's reading chair still faced the window overlooking the sea. His pipe sat on the side. Table, half filled with tobacco that had long since dried out. The calendar on the wall was still turned to August 1970, the month he died. Dorothy's breath caught in her throat. Someone had been here. Someone had kept it this way. She moved through the rooms like a ghost visiting her own past. The kitchen, where she had learned to make coffee at age 7 because her father needed it before his midnight checks. The tiny bedroom where she had read every book the traveling library boat brought, sometimes the same ones 3 or 4 times. The radio room where her father had logged every ship that passed, his handwriting precise and careful in leather-bound notebooks. The notebooks were gone. Dorothy's heart began to pound. Those notebooks had been her father's life's work. 40 years of records, weather observations, ship movements, rescue operations. She had meant to donate them to the Maritime Museum, but never got around to it after the funeral. Now the shelf stood empty except for a thin layer of dust and one single notebook, placed dead center. She reached for it with trembling hands. The leather was newer than her father's old journals, the pages crisp and unused, except for the first page. In handwriting that made her knees buckle, her father had written, "Dorothy, if you're reading this, you came back. I knew you would. I need you to understand what happened on August 12, 1970. I need you to know I didn't fall." That's when everything changed. Dorothy collapsed into his old chair, the notebook clutched against her chest. Her father had fallen from the lighthouse gallery during a storm. That was the official report. That was what she had believed for 3 years, even though it never made sense. Samuel Brennan had climbed those stairs in every kind of weather for 4 decades. He knew every loose step, every slippery rail. He wouldn't have fallen. She forced herself to open the notebook again and keep reading. Her father's words were rushed, desperate. "They're coming tonight. I found something I wasn't supposed to find. The ships that disappeared, Dorothy. The ones that never made it past Crescent Point. It wasn't the rocks. It wasn't the fog. Someone was luring them in, turning off the light at precise moments. I have proof. I have names. But they know I know." Dorothy's hands shook so badly she almost dropped the notebook. She had been 12 years old when the Mary Catherine went down. She remembered her father's face that morning, gray and haunted, as he radioed the Coast Guard about the wreckage. 17 souls lost. The investigation concluded it was equipment failure combined with poor visibility. But her father had stopped sleeping well after that. He started checking the light mechanism obsessively, sometimes 3 or 4 times a night. The notebook continued. "I'm leaving this for you because you're smart, Dorothy. Smarter than they think. The proof is in the light mechanism itself. There's a second switch, hidden behind the main panel. Someone installed it years ago, before I even arrived. It can override the automatic system, turn the light off remotely. I found the wire. I followed it. I know where it leads. But I can't go to the authorities yet. They're everywhere, Dorothy. Some of them wear uniforms. Wait, don't miss this detail." Dorothy stood and walked to the window. The lighthouse stood 60 yards away, its beam continuing its endless rotation. Someone had written this notebook after her father died. Someone had imitated his handwriting, or... No. She looked at the date on the first entry. August 11th, 1970. 1 day before he died. This was real. Her father had written this the night before he fell. The night before he was pushed. She read faster now, her father's words blurring. "If something happens to me, you need to document everything. Take photographs of the hidden switch. Find the wire and see where it terminates. Get the shipping records from the harbor master's office for every vessel lost near Crescent Point in the last 20 years. Cross-reference them with the lighthouse logs. You'll see the pattern. You'll see the gaps. And Dorothy, whatever you do, don't trust Sheriff Morrison. Don't trust anyone from town. This goes deeper than you can imagine." The notebook ended there, mid-sentence, as if her father had heard something and had to hide it quickly. Dorothy sat in the darkness of the cottage, listening to the wind howl around the walls. The same wind that had been her lullaby as a child now sounded like a warning. She thought about the letter that had brought her here. He never left Dorothy. What did that mean? That her father's spirit lingered? That his killer was still here? That the conspiracy he uncovered was still active? She made a decision. She would climb the lighthouse tonight and find that hidden switch. She would photograph it, document it, and then she would drive straight to the state police, bypassing everyone local. She would finish what her father started. But as Dorothy stood to leave the cottage, she noticed something that froze her in place. Fresh mud on the floor, boot prints leading from the door to where she sat, then back out again. Someone had been here while she was reading. Someone had been watching her. Even now, Dorothy was still, holding on. She grabbed her flashlight and ran for the lighthouse. The door was unlocked, which wasn't right. The Coast Guard kept it secured. She climbed the spiral stairs 2 at a time, her footsteps echoing in the narrow space. Round and round, up and up, 147 steps to the light room. She had climbed them thousands of times, but never this fast, never with this kind of fear pushing her forward. The light mechanism was housed in a room no bigger than a closet. Huge Fresnel lenses rotated on a motorized base, magnifying the beam and sending it out across the water. Dorothy had always loved this room. The precise machinery, the smell of oil and metal, the way the light painted everything in sweeping shadows. But tonight it felt different, dangerous. She found the main electrical panel and pried it open with a screwdriver from the emergency kit. Behind the tangle of wires and circuit breakers, she saw it. A secondary switch, painted the same color as the metal housing, almost invisible unless you knew to look for it. And below it, a wire that shouldn't be there, running down through a hole drilled in the floor. Dorothy took out her camera and started shooting pictures. The flash illuminated the small space in bursts. Click. The hidden switch. Click. The unauthorized wire. Click. The serial numbers on the light mechanism. Evidence. Proof. Everything her father had tried to preserve before they silenced him. You won't believe what happened next. The lighthouse went dark. Not just the beam, everything. The motor that rotated the lenses stopped. The emergency lights in the stairwell died. Complete and total darkness except for Dorothy's flashlight. Someone had cut the power. Someone had cut her off from the world. She heard footsteps on the stairs below. Heavy boots, moving slowly, deliberately. They weren't rushing because they knew she had nowhere to go. The only way down was through them. Dorothy's mind raced. The gallery. The external walkway that circled the light room. If she could get outside, she might be able to climb down the emergency ladder that ran along the lighthouse's exterior. It was dangerous, especially in the dark with the wind whipping off the ocean, but it was her only chance. She pushed open the gallery door and stepped out into the night. The wind hit her like a physical force, nearly knocking her off her feet. The metal walkway was slick with spray from the waves crashing below. She could taste salt on her lips. Her flashlight beam seemed pathetically small against the vast darkness of the sea. The emergency ladder was on the opposite side of the gallery. Dorothy edged around the walkway, pressing her back against the lighthouse wall, feeling for the railing with one hand. The drop below was 70 feet onto rocks. The same rocks her father had been found on 3 years ago. The same rocks that had been blamed for his death. She was halfway around when the gallery door opened again. A figure stepped out, backlit for a moment by a flashlight before the door closed again. She couldn't see his face, but she recognized the silhouette, Sheriff Morrison. Her father had been right about everything. Morrison's voice carried on the wind. "Dorothy, you don't understand what you've stumbled into. Your father didn't either. Some things are bigger than one person's sense of right and wrong. Come back inside. We can talk about this." She kept moving, faster now, not caring about the sound her shoes made on the metal grating. She reached the emergency ladder and swung herself over the railing. The ladder was slippery, the rungs coated in algae and salt. Her hands struggled to grip. She descended as quickly as she dared, not looking down, focusing only on the next rung and the next. "What you've heard so far is only the beginning." Morrison appeared above her at the railing. He was holding something, pointing it down at her. For a moment she thought it was a gun, but then she realized it was just his flashlight. He could see her clearly now, clinging to the ladder like a bug on a wall. He could end this with one shot if he wanted to, but he didn't fire. Instead, he called down, "Your father found out about the operation, Dorothy. He found out about the ships we were letting through, the ones that didn't check in with customs, the ones carrying things we weren't supposed to see. All we did was turn off the light for a few minutes at a time. That's all. We didn't sink anyone. The captains knew the risks. They were being paid for those risks." Dorothy kept climbing down. 20 feet to go. Her arms burned. The wind threatened to peel her off the ladder with every gust. Morrison continued. But Samuel couldn't leave it alone. He started taking notes, making copies of the logs, talking about going to federal authorities. We tried to reason with him. We tried to explain how many families in this town depend on the money that comes from looking the other way. But he wouldn't listen. He said he'd dedicated his life to saving people at sea, not helping criminals exploit it. 10 feet to go. Dorothy could see the rocks below now, slick and black and deadly. Her father had hit those rocks. They had thrown him off the gallery to make it look like an accident. And now they were going to do the same to her. But then she saw something that changed everything. Lights, headlights on the coastal road. Multiple vehicles approaching fast. The cavalry was coming, but she didn't know if they were here to save her or finish the job. Morrison saw them too. He cursed and disappeared back into the lighthouse. Dorothy dropped, the last few feet, landing hard on the rocks, pain shooting through her ankle. She scrambled toward the parking area, slipping and falling and getting back up. The vehicles were closer now. She could see they were Coast Guard. Real Coast Guard, not local deputies on the payroll. She collapsed at the edge of the parking lot, just as the first vehicle skidded to a stop. Men in uniform poured out, shouting commands. Someone wrapped a blanket around her shoulders. Someone else was asking if she was hurt. She tried to speak, but her throat was raw from the wind and the fear. Then she saw them bringing Morrison out of the lighthouse in handcuffs. His face was calm, almost resigned, as they loaded him into a vehicle. He looked at Dorothy once as they drove past. There was no anger in his eyes, no hatred, just a kind of tired acceptance, as if he'd known this moment would come eventually. An officer crouched beside her. He introduced himself as Captain Walsh from the Coast Guard Investigative Service. He explained that they'd been building a case for 18 months. They'd known about the corruption, but couldn't prove who was involved until they recovered the lighthouse's original logs from a storage facility in Boston. Someone had kept copies, hidden them away decades ago. Those logs showed the pattern her father had discovered: regular, systematic blackouts corresponding with vessels that later vanished from official records. Dorothy pulled the notebook from her coat and handed it to Walsh. He read the first page, and his expression shifted to something like reverence. "Your father was a brave man," he said quietly. "He died trying to protect people he'd never meet, ships that would pass through these waters years after he was gone." She nodded, unable to speak yet. Walsh continued, "We got your roommate's call. She said you'd received a strange letter and driven off in a hurry. She was worried. We'd been monitoring Crescent Point for weeks, waiting for someone to make a move. When we saw the lighthouse go dark, we knew something was happening." "The letter," Dorothy managed to croak. "Who sent it?" Walsh hesitated. "We're not sure yet. We found evidence that someone else has been maintaining the cottage, keeping your father's things exactly as they were. Someone who wanted you to come back and find the truth. We're working on identifying them now." Over the following days, the full scope of the conspiracy emerged. Sheriff Morrison was just one part of a network that stretched along the entire northern coast. Harbor officials, customs inspectors, even some Coast Guard personnel had been paid to look the other way as ships carrying contraband passed through. Drugs, weapons, smuggled goods of every kind. The operation had been running for more than 30 years. Dorothy's father hadn't been the first lighthouse keeper to notice. There had been others, at different points along the coast, who had started asking questions or keeping detailed records. Most had been quietly transferred or pressured into early retirement. Samuel Brennan had been too stubborn to be moved and too close to the truth to be left alone. The hidden switch in the lighthouse was dismantled and logged as evidence. The wire led to a relay station 3 miles inland, where someone could remotely turn off the beacon on command. Federal investigators found similar installations at 4 other lighthouses along the coast, all strategically placed at dangerous passages where ships had to navigate carefully. 17 people were eventually indicted. The trials lasted 2 years. Dorothy attended every day of Morrison's hearing, sitting in the back row, watching the man who killed her father try to justify it all as economic necessity. He got 25 years. The others got various sentences. None of it brought her father back. But something else happened that Dorothy hadn't expected. The letter writer revealed themselves. It was Thomas Brennan, her father's younger brother, who she'd only met twice as a child. He'd been a sailor, spent most of his life at sea, and had fallen out of touch with the family. When he heard about Samuel's death, he didn't believe the official story. He came back to Crescent Point and started his own investigation, maintaining the cottage as a kind of shrine while he searched for evidence. Thomas had been dying of lung cancer when he sent that letter. He knew he didn't have much time left and needed Dorothy to finish what both he and Samuel had started. He passed away 2 weeks after Morrison's arrest, never knowing that justice would actually be served. Dorothy returned to Portland, but found she couldn't settle back into her old life. The bookstore felt too small, too quiet, too safe. She had touched something real in that lighthouse, something that mattered beyond her own small existence. Her father had given his life for strangers he'd never meet, ships he'd never see. That meant something. She applied to the Coast Guard Investigative Service. It took her 2 tries to pass the physical requirements. Her ankle had never quite healed right from that night, but she made it. She spent the next 20 years working maritime safety cases, exposing corruption, improving lighthouse protocols, advocating for better protections for whistleblowers. People who worked with her said she had a particular passion for keeper safety. She fought for better communication systems, more frequent inspections, clearer chains of command for reporting irregularities. She probably saved dozens of lives through the policy changes she championed, though she never kept count. Dorothy Brennan retired in 1994 and moved back to Maine, though not to Crescent Point. She bought a small house in Camden, where she could see the ocean but didn't have to live in complete isolation. She wrote a book about her father and the investigation, dedicating it to all the lighthouse keepers who stood watch in dangerous places so others could pass safely. The book never became a bestseller. Most people aren't interested in maritime corruption from the 1970s, but it found its audience. Other keeper families, Coast Guard historians, people who understood that sometimes the most important heroism happens in the dark, in lonely places, witnessed by no one. Crescent Point Lighthouse still stands today. It's fully automated now, solar-powered, maintained by periodic visits from Coast Guard technicians. The cottage was eventually torn down, too expensive to maintain and too isolated to attract buyers. But the lighthouse itself remains, its beam sweeping across the water every 15 seconds, just as it has for over 100 years. I've been to Crescent Point a few times over the years. The road is paved now. There's a small parking area and an informational plaque about Samuel Brennan, the keeper who died protecting maritime safety. It doesn't tell the whole story. Official accounts rarely do, but it acknowledges his sacrifice. On clear nights, you can stand at the edge of the parking lot and watch ships pass in the distance, their lights twinkling like stars. They have no idea that someone died to make their passage safer. They don't know about Dorothy's desperate climb down that ladder, or Thomas's quiet investigation, or the corruption that ran so deep it took federal intervention to root out. But I know. And now you know too. Dorothy passed away in 2019 at the age of 73. I attended her funeral in Camden. It was a small ceremony. She never married, had no children, just a handful of colleagues from her Coast Guard years, and some friends from her retirement community. The service was simple. No one gave a long eulogy because Dorothy hadn't wanted one. She'd left specific instructions. I did what needed doing. That's all. Let me rest now. They scattered her ashes at sea, out past Crescent Point, in the shipping lanes her father had protected for 40 years. The Coast Guard sent a cutter to perform the ceremony. As her ashes touched the water, the crew sounded the ship's horn, a long, mournful note that echoed across the waves. And if you listened carefully, and I was listening very carefully, you could hear another horn answering from somewhere in the distance, just a trick of the wind, probably. Sound carries strange ways across open water, but I like to think it was Samuel Brennan, acknowledging his daughter's return, welcoming her home to the sea they both loved and served. This has been Echoes of 1970. I'm Evelyn Brooks. Thank you for listening. Some stories need to be told, even if they're hard to hear, especially if they're hard to hear. Dorothy Brennan made sure her father's story didn't die in the dark. Tonight, I've made sure her story won't either. The light still turns, the ships still pass, and somewhere in the archives of the Coast Guard Investigative Service, there's a file marked Brennan, Samuel, that tells the truth about what happened at Crescent Point Lighthouse on August 12, 1970. It's not marked classified anymore. Anyone can read it if they know where to look, but most people don't look. Most people never think about the lonely figures who tend the lights, who climb the stairs night after night, who stand watch in storms and fog and danger so that others can find their way home safely. We take for granted that the lights will always be there, that someone is always watching. Samuel Brennan was watching, and when he saw something wrong, he didn't look away. That cost him everything. But his daughter made sure it meant something. She made sure his death changed things, saved lives, made the waters a little safer for everyone who would come after. That's the story I wanted to tell you tonight. Not a ghost story, though there are ghosts in it. Not a mystery, though there was a mystery. Just a story about people who chose to do the right thing, even when the right thing was dangerous, even when it was lonely, even when no one would ever know. But we know now. And that matters. It has to matter. Good night, listeners. Safe travels. And if you're ever driving down a lonely coastal highway and you see a lighthouse in the distance, take a moment to think about the keepers who stood in those towers, the ones we remember and the ones we've forgotten. They were there for us, even if we never knew. Their names. This is Evelyn Brooks, signing off. Until next time, keep listening. The past has more to teach us than we realize.